is tracing the journey of Irish music to America and back home.
Turlough Carolan was a blind 17th century Irish harper who composed a large number of very beautiful tunes. And he lived at a time of a sort of a watershed in Irish history when the old Irish civilization was collapsing and the place of the old Irish nobility was being taken by new English settlers who didn't understand the old court music. So Carolan and his contemporaries played music which was a sort of a hybrid between the more ancient Irish styles of court music and the music which was popular in contemporary music in contemporary Europe, the music of the baroque style. So most of Carolan's output is very baroque in its style, but has this very interesting sort of Irishness about it as well.
European art music did not establish itself easily in Ireland. For hundreds of years, a different but highly developed form of music flourished. This was the court music of the old harping tradition. Its patrons were the old Gaelic nobility. In the 18th century, the blind harper Turlough Carolan came in contact with European baroque music. The result of this encounter was a fusion of European art music and the Irish harping tradition.
It's said that when Carolan came to the end of his life, when he felt that his death was approaching, he went to the house of Mrs. MacDermot Rowe, who was a member of an ancient princely family of Connacht, and he went there to die. And she greeted him at the door, and he eventually took to his bed. And before he died, he is said to have played this piece of music, which has been known ever since as Carolan's Farewell to Music. And it's interesting from a musical point of view in that it shows no baroque influence whatever, that it's very, very Irish in its whole style and conception and emotion. And it's interesting, of course, that it should be his last composition, that he went back to his roots, so to speak, at the end.
Irish harpers were court musicians. The class they served, the old Gaelic aristocracy, went into a terminal decline in the 17th century. Within 100 years, the harping tradition had died out. A uniquely Irish instrument, the uilleann pipes, gradually came into popular use. In time, the pipes came to occupy a dominant position in the musical life of Irish communities. Uilleann pipes were found at all levels of Irish society. They were played by the well-to-do and by poor itinerant musicians. Today, the uilleann pipes remain at the centre of Irish traditional music. Liam O'Flynn is a contemporary piper. His playing expresses the unbroken continuity of a 300-year tradition of piping.
The music that's played on the uilleann pipes is dance music, the same as what's played on fiddles and flutes. Obviously, tunes are changed slightly, adapted slightly to suit the particular characteristics, the nature of the instrument. Exact dates aren't known about when the uilleann pipes sort of came into existence. Probably around 1700 or maybe a little bit earlier. The bellows was added apparently. But the great breakthrough, if you like, was in developing the reed that's in the uilleann pipes. By overblowing, you get the second octave, and it has a range. The uilleann pipes chanter here has a range of 2 full octaves.
So if you were to blow these up, as it were, you literally do that, do you?
Yes, indeed. You have your bellows here, pump the bellows, and you inflate this bag under my left arm. You can see where the bellows and the bag are connected. Inflate the bag. Using pressure then with the left arm, you vibrate this reed in here. I'll demonstrate that for you. Then this brings on the drones here.
Now, this instrument you have on, how old is it and where does it come from?
It's apparently it was made by a man named Maurice Coyne, who incidentally was a Kildare man, probably about 1830. It's a unique instrument, very special instrument indeed. It belonged to the late Seamus Ennis. Seamus tells me that his father found the instrument in London in a second-hand antique shop or whatever, brought it back, had it restored, and that was around the turn of the century.
The Irish piping tradition is orally transmitted. Liam O'Flynn learned much of his playing from the collector, broadcaster and master piper, Seamus Ennis.
Well, Liam and fellow pipers all, the air that I propose to play is a Rutu Egin Garrig, Were You at the Rock, or Were You at Carrick? For your interest, it was an air, the words of which it was sung as a code during the penal times, when Mass used to be said on a rock in the mountains. And I learned this song from an old man in the county home in Ennis. And this was as the version of the tune that he had. And I consider it goes very well on the pipes.
He was a great man. I was very proud to be his daughter. My parents split up and I met him for the first time in 15 years when I was 19. I was an organ scholar at Oxford reading music. And this marvellous Irishman arrived with the pipes and played, and I was captivated. He was at that time very ill and slow in his speech and charming, and it was very, very moving. You can't imagine how moving it was to meet him again and to discover that this amazing character, personality was in fact your father, when you're sort of, to all intents and purposes, an English church organist. You can imagine the difficulty. But I was very, very proud of being his daughter. I first heard Easter Snow, played by Seamus. It was a particular favourite of his, so much so that he called his home after it. And he had the words Easter Snow painted on the gate outside the field where his caravan stood. And Liam loved it because he learned it from Seamus and suggested that when we played together that we should try this as one of the numbers we experimented with.
This is the small rural townland of Cuil in West Cork. It was here that the Irish composer, Shawn O'Suilleabhean, lived until his death at the age of 40 in 1971. Like the piper Seamus Ennis, Shawn O'Suilleabhean was educated in the orally transmitted music of the Irish tradition. He also worked as a professional musician and composer of European art music. He was excited by the creative possibilities of bringing the two closer together. His objective was to forge a new cultural identity for Ireland based on the best of its rich musical heritage. O'Suilleabhean's contribution to Irish music was to have a significance which long outlasted his early death.
There is not a European classical music tradition in this country. There is, on the other hand, a highly developed traditional music which, because it's orally transmitted, must not be considered essentially as folk music. For example, in the Orient, you have music which is orally transmitted but is still highly developed.
Yes.
You have the court music of Japan, for example, and the Korean novices music, that kind of thing.
When you write your music, your own music, that would be in the Irish tradition also.
Well, no, I wear two hats, so to speak, as a composer. I wear a hat as a traditional musician in the Irish tradition, but also because I've been trained in a European background. I compose European music, 12-note music, serial music.
Oh, yes.
And naturally enough, that's written as you would write serial music.
Yes.
The Irish music, well, you don't write it as such. This has to be, it's spontaneous. It's
very much improvised.
Improvised, yes. Just the same as Indian rock.
At one stage, my father decided, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, that he wanted to rear his family in the Gaeltacht. Gaeltacht is a Gaelic or Irish-speaking area which you can find on the western seaboard of Ireland, or this one place here, which is up in the mountains in West Cork. Now, oddly enough, when we came here, his grandmother came from here as well, from across the hill, Kilnamarthra. And she used to sing all the songs from around here. She was a musician and a concertina player and fiddle player and so on, as was his father. And the first piece of music that my father ever set was a thing called The Banks of Ceylon. He set it for strings as a first-year student in UCC himself. And when we landed here, probably the house nearest to the river is our house, on the banks of Ceylon. It was peculiar that we returned home, as it were. It's the combination of the river, the bees, St. Governor, the hills, and the people. They're all sort of mixed together in a sort of a porridge, if you like, that makes a unit.
Any talk about the revival of Irish music over the last 30, 40 years would have to include the name of Shawn O'Suilleabhean. He was a charismatic figure. He took Irish music and he arranged it for orchestra and did some great work. Now, other people had done this before, but they hadn't done it with the same sensitivity to the traditional ethos and the traditional element. Aodh understood the spirit of this music and was able to convey that spirit through symphony orchestras or through on other arrangements. And he was very committed to all this. I mean, he arranged the music, but arranged is too strong a word. Where he took the music and fitted the traditional players into this grouping. He didn't just write the music down and give it to professional musicians outside the tradition. He brought in the actual people who were playing it, some of them who couldn't read music at all. And then from that he developed the Cuil Carolan group. And I suppose the climax of that group was the great concert held in the Gaiety Theatre in 1969. Apart from that, Aodh took the music into a wider plane. He composed music using a lot of traditional themes. And I suppose the most famous piece of music was for the film Micheal O'Suilleabhean. This was a documentary film about giving more or less the history of Ireland from the beginning, the end of the Queen Victoria period, right up to 1916. And the film consisted of old news clips. The producer or director, George Morrison, searched all the archives in Ireland and England and in France. And this became the film Micheal O'Suilleabhean, and Aodh was commissioned to do the music.
The film Micheal O'Suilleabhean was an outstanding success. It was shown in crowded cinemas and halls the length and breadth of Ireland. It helped confirm the Irish Republic's sense of being separate, both politically and culturally. In writing the score for Micheal O'Suilleabhean, Shawn O'Suilleabhean revolutionised the popular image of Irish music. He orchestrated traditional melodies, but he also used his own formidable creative skills to compose a score that brought Irish music into the modern world.
He created a music that personified for people this separate identity. And it really took hold of the imaginations of people.
Shawn O'Suilleabhean captured the imagination of the people in another way. Here in the church in Cuil, his son Peadar directs the choir established by his father in the 60s. Shawn O'Suilleabhean's liturgical music is sung in Irish.
I probably am in a peculiar position in that I would think that I'm probably one of the few Gaeltacht people or Irish-speaking people who's been reared in the tradition, the culture, who's actually been classically trained as well. So I probably have a slightly different view of the whole affair because my priorities when I'm looking at something will be quite different.
So the music that the choir would play on a day like St. Goblet's Day would be Sean's music, would it?
It would. Well, every Sunday and every day we sing in the church, it's Sean's music basically, unless it's something new that has cropped up in the liturgy since then, in which case it would be probably my music. I hate that way it sounds, my music sounds, because it isn't mine. It doesn't come from me. It comes from whatever is behind me, the culture, in other words. The basic premise of our culture is, as reflected in our music and poetry, is that all of us must participate. There is no audience. And there are a lot of people now who have learnt a lot about Irish music and try and simulate Irish music then by sitting down at the paper and calculating it two-dimensionally, if you like, and writing it, as it were. But that doesn't relate to our tradition. One thing that is most important in that in the Irish situation is the fact that in the last century, you had a population of some 8.5 million people, and between famine and emigration, it was decimated down to 2.5 million. Now, in the space of 80 years, if you do that to anything, even a herd of elephants, I mean, you're going to cause havoc to their psychology and psychic. And the Irish nation, the Irish people as a whole, have a huge psychic hurt, which they have pushed way down to the subconscious, but it's still there and it comes out in various forms. So there is a relationship between surroundings and the people.
How the Rodeo's concern is to develop the relationship between environment and music. To an old song heralding the arrival of summer, he blends the sounds of a rocking cradle, wind chimes, metronome, handbells, children's voices, as well as harmonium and piano. The technology of multi-track recording is harnessed to produce a sound both contemporary and traditional. The life, the language and the environment of the community in Cuil are the wellsprings of Peadar O'Riordan's creativity. His work strives to realise those cultural values without which, as he says, music would only be two-dimensional. A refusal to compromise the spirit of traditional music informs the work of other musicians, like Artie McGlynn and Nully Casey. Their musical origins are a mixture of traditional and classical. Here they play a tune, Moran's Return. The interpretation is new, but the voice is true to the traditional source. The north of England city of Huddersfield hosts an annual festival of new music. It was here the avant-garde American composer John Cage mounted a performance of Roratorio, a work based on Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. Roratorio is a work which brings Irish traditional music directly into the arena of experimental art music.
Well, it began with an invitation from a magazine in Wisconsin that asked me to write something about Finnegan's Wake. And my habit has been for many years, if I'm asked something like that, is to write mesostics. And I thought to write mesostics on Joyce's name. A mesostic would take the first J of James, and I would look for a word that had J in it that didn't have an A. The A belongs on the second line. And then I'd look for an A that didn't have an M, and so forth. That way I could go stepping through the words onto the end of the part. Anyway, the first, I didn't agree to do it at first because I had so much music to write. But when I finally did, I got the taste of Joyce, and I couldn't get rid of it.
Roratorio is not a conventional work. John Cage is a composer who broke with conventional European art music many years ago. Roratorio is a soundscape composed of several elements. The performance consists of a multi-track recording of the sounds listed by Cage from Finnegan's Wake. Over this river of sound, Cage recites word formations or mesostics taken from the text.
You work with Irish musicians and with Irish players. What sort of a feeling does it give you? What sort of a feeling does the music give you?
Well, I love it very much. You know that I love it both as it is, that is to say when the parts are all together in the right way, but I like it even more when the parts are independent of one another as they are in Roratorio, where one of them doesn't support the other, but they're all each in its own space, so that you hear several songs going on at once. It makes them marvelously complex and I think from an Irish point of view, an unexpectedly lively feeling.
In Roratorio, John Cage uses 6 traditional musicians. The performance lasts an hour, and his only direction to the players is to perform anything they wish in whatever order they decide. Their contribution must not exceed 20 minutes in total. In this way, they perform independently of each other, in random and undirected sequences. Deconstructing music in this way, Cage sees his art approaching the randomness and contingency of life itself.
Well, generally, with Irish traditional music, when musicians play together, they usually play jigs and reels, the same tune at the same time. And baron players normally play along with them. And that was one of the difficulties, or one of the difficult things to explain to us and to all the musicians, that no longer did we have to synchronize, that we were part of a collage of sound, and that our individual contribution had the same value or lack of value as any other sound that was produced.
At first I thought it was dreadful, utterly dreadful balderdash. But as time went on, I began to listen, and I gradually fell in love with the thing. And like everybody else in life has something to look forward to, their holidays or to go fishing, whatever. And what I look forward to most than anything else is another Roratorio with John and the other musicians. And it's really marvellous to think that something that to me was ugly at the outset now stands as a little joy in my life.
This September in California, I heard Mel playing with Noreen Ní Rian, and I enjoyed her voice so much that she's singing with us this evening, and is, of course, I hope, Anna Olivia Plurabelle.
You haven't been at a performance of Oratorio.
No.
Though you're about to participate in one, and you haven't yet been immersed in this experience. Have you heard the tape?
Yes, of course. But you see, then, Richard, our singing tradition, as you know, is quite unlike the instrumental in that it's very much a solo tradition. We don't have the tradition of people singing together. At least it's not common. You know, it's so most. So for me, it's an added experience actually to be surrounded by people who are experiencing just existence in a very different level.
Families symbolizing Puritas,
Noreen Ní Rian is well known as a singer in Ireland. Her home is in County Limerick. Close by is the Benedictine Abbey of Glenstal. Shawn Colvin, one of her teachers at University College Cork in the 60s, was convinced that there was a close connection between Irish traditional singing and plain chant. Noreen's interest in Irish liturgical music drew her to the monastery choir. This association has lasted for many years. Here Noreen Ní Rian and the monks of Glenstal Abbey sing on Tashairi, a song of the resurrection. Noreen learnt this song from the Shanno singer Joe Heaney. Micheal O'Suilleabhean's music also straddles two traditions, the literate art music of the classical tradition and the orally transmitted music of the Irish tradition. His concerns as a composer of Irish music are to bring the two closer together.
Okay, let's get that 4 after D, okay?
Da 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 da.
Right, the 2/8/4s are, I mean, they're
all.
3/3/2 and 3/2/3.
Right.
Is that what you're asking me? And I would accent the first of each of the groupings.
Even the last one.
Even the last one, yeah, I would have thought.
I was thinking maybe all accents. Dun, dun, dun. That's what I was thinking.
I suppose it would give a cleaner ending, wouldn't it? If the whole band did it da 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 da. Gonna try it? And can you remember to have the just a full sound? Here we go.
Uilleann, Island, is a work for chamber orchestra and traditional flute. The classical idioms of European art music form a dialogue with traditional Irish music. Both types of musical composition and performance enrich each other. Micheal O'Suilleabhean chooses to occupy a space between two great traditions. In doing so, he has produced a work that is accessible and is recognisably Irish. There is every sign that Irish music will continue to find its voice through the work of musicians like Micheal O'Suilleabhean. Drawing on the resources of many traditions and disciplines, music is produced which is expressive of the diversity of the Irish experience.
37 tracks from Bringing It All Back Home are now available on cassette, album and CD. And there's also a book by Nuala O'Connor which accompanies the series.